Hello and welcome to our People Pioneers in Action interview series. I'm Vi Heller, co-founder of The Pioneers. We provide people products and support for startups, scale-ups and small businesses who want to create a culture they can be proud of. This series is all about the challenges faced by people and culture leaders in growing businesses, how they've approached them, the lessons they've learned along the way, and their top tips for others who are grappling with similar issues in similar situations. In this episode, I'm talking to Daniel Illis, VP of People at Vinted. Daniel shares his experience of what it's like to join a company with a truly exceptional culture and then be responsible for not messing this up as they grow. His story is one of trying to balance the need for consistency, efficiency, and fairness in people processes with the desire for personalisation, flexibility, and consensus-driven decisions that's kept the company culture so strong. I learned a lot speaking to Daniel, and I hope you do too. So good morning, Daniel. It's lovely to see you.
Good morning.
Can I just get you to start by quickly introducing yourself? Who are you? Where do you work? What's your background?
Sure. So my name is Daniel Illis, and I'm VP People at Vinted. Vinted is one of the world's largest secondhand fashion marketplaces. So that's kind of our core business. We also have a smaller kind of emerging business unit as well in the shipping logistics space for sort of leveraging our volume and capability and marketing that to other businesses as well right now. So those are kind of the two major businesses that we operate. And I sort of look after the whole people function, which supports these two business units in their journey.
Brilliant, thank you. And why did you join a company like Vinted? What was attractive about the company and what was attractive about your particular role?
Yeah, so look, I left my last company, Drover, and I had a pretty clear set of things I was looking for in my next thing, right? So I was quite sort of prescriptive about what were the non-negotiables for me. And it took me some time, but Vinted did tick all the boxes. So they were one, a scaling journey. So I think so much of the excitement and sort of interesting aspect of the people function comes from the complexity of scaling and from how scale changes everything. And so I wanted to continue to experience that. And specifically, I was hoping to experience that at a different scale. So going from, say 100 some people to several hundred or even thousands, rather than kind of the 0 to 1 journey, which I had done before. So the scaling journey was a key piece for me. Two, I was looking for a CEO at a leadership team that understood the value that the people function can bring to the table. Didn't think about the people function, in the classical sense of a support function, but rather as a driver of growth and an enabler of the organization to achieve its objectives, which is really important for me. And I think it's the right backdrop to drive value in this role. And then third, a mission. So I had worked in companies where I strongly connected with what we were trying to do from a mission perspective, and also in companies where I didn't. And I sort of noticed a difference for myself in terms of waking up in the morning on a difficult day, feeling, and feeling motivated or not. It really mattered whether I believed in what we were trying to do or not. And so it was important for me to find that kind of mission connection again. And and Vinted ticked all the boxes. So I dove head first into it. Despite the fact it was a little bit of a weird setup, the company being based out of Lithuania, which is a country I had never been to at that time. But because of these three factors, it still felt like, despite all those challenges and difficulties that I kind of foresaw, it felt like the right decision for me.
Yeah, I mean, when you say it like that, I think it's a company that why wouldn't everybody want to work at Vinted?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a hard 3 boxes to tick. So great that you found it. Just to set the context for this conversation, then, can you give me very quickly, you've been there 2.5 years now. What's been the kind of journey that you've been on and you've taken the people function on in that time as well?
Sure. So I joined the company when we were about 400 people. For context, we're now 1,500. So we've had about 1,100 people plus replacing attrition. And really, the story has been about building on the very strong culture that I came to and reinforcing it with infrastructure. So what do I mean by that? So Vinted had always had really strong people metrics, basically. So for the past, at least for the past couple of years, the company did have a difficult moment back in 2016 when some folks were laid off and the company restructured its business model. But basically, after that restructure, when we sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of product market fit and things started to go really well, the people metrics have been really strong. So very high engagement. We're still at 72 headline eNPS, which is effectively answering the question, would you recommend Vinted as a place to work to friends and family? Also very low turnover. So we're still sort of under 10%, which is really quite low for tech companies. And so I think largely because these metrics were strong and people generally felt like we had a strong culture where people felt valued and felt connected with the mission. Investment into infrastructure was delayed. So a lot of companies kind of go through building fundamentals in terms of structured hiring, performance management, compensation, etc. Slightly earlier, but they often do that because it's in response to some sort of problem they see in their people metrics, or it's a reaction to what they're hearing from their employees. For Vinted, I think so that investment into infrastructure was a little delayed, and so I came to a company which had super strong values that people actually believed in, and that are actually discussed at every meeting where we make decisions. A mission that people are really empowered by and inspired by, but a lot of sort of disparate ways when it comes to how we do performance management, how we think about compensation. Leaders kind of took charge themselves over time. So say you're head of engineering or head of data science, you kind of, people sort of develop their own ways of working when it comes to these core processes. So a lot of what I've been doing for the past 2.5 years with my team is to review that and see if there's an even better way that can work across the company, because those processes I talked about, performance management, compensation, how we hire, et cetera, all of those things are very central, and I think defining for culture. And if you let them sort of go into all sorts of directions, we risk weakening that strong culture that we have in the first place. And so much of my work, to kind of, in summary, has been centralizing, aligning, building infrastructure across the board. So that's been much of the theme.
And can I ask, those compensation, how you do performance management, those sorts of things where you've been trying to create more consistency and alignment in the business, can you share specific examples of where maybe managers have done things quite differently and the consequence of that on people's experience of work, maybe where it was good and where it created some challenge?
Yeah, so for example, when it comes to compensation, one department might be thinking about things in an absolute way, meaning interpreting a salary range effectively as a linear growth spectrum. So if you land in the middle of that range, that means you're kind of performing at the at the, you're performing where like perfectly for the expectations for the role, but not quite above, not really below it either. And sort of looking at people year over year in that absolute sense.
Mm-hmm.
So when determining someone's comp increase next year, you'll look at them, okay, how far have they now how far in terms of their growth have they now penetrated this range? And we should really adjust them to that point. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is a relative way, which is saying, if this person's at this place in the range, they should be happy with X percentage raise, which is really relative to where they are now, but not really kind of thinking of the entire range as a spectrum that should be sort of linearly penetrated. So I think this is a kind of a complex example, but just to demonstrate there's different ways of thinking about compensation. And I think it's important that that we tell, however we think about it, we tell that story clearly to employees. And if you can do that in a consistent way across the company, I think you'll end up with a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And I also think that kind of to stay with compensation, if you're to demonstrate another example, right? So some leaders think that compensation should be a little bit like entrepreneurial budget, where they have a certain bucket of cash to distribute, and they should do that as they see fit. And 1 year they might choose to hire more people, which means they have less to give to existing employees in terms of compensation raises. And 1 year they may choose to do the opposite. Now, I think the issue with that, for example, is you end up in a world where the same standard of performance, the same output translates into a different compensation outcome, depending on which leader you work under and how they think about the market, etc. And I also think that that's a very dangerous place, because then you start having a situation where leaders start to compete unhealthily for talent, because people start to understand that performance gets rewarded differently depending on where they work. So these are just some examples of ways in which divergent outcomes can become problematic for in terms of culture.
Yeah, I think the really nice thing listening to you describing those challenges is you have a set of leaders who have thought about what to do around compensation. Even if they've all come to different set of principles, they've at least engaged with that as a people management challenge. So at least you've got plenty of perspectives to start the dialogue from, rather than a leadership base who go, tell me what I need to do, and don't actually engage with the problem. And I think that not only another potential challenge with having inconsistent approaches to something like compensation, it's not just you may create this competition for talent, but it's also just a basic fairness principle across the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. So one of the, I think the best things about Vinted is actually exactly that. So the fact that leaders have thought about these things on their own accord and developed their thinking and really dove deep has been tremendously beneficial, in the sense that they're very engaged in these topics. And it's not a question of, oh, that's just a thing that HR has to do, and we'll do whatever we're told, without really engaging with it. I think it's been really helpful for my team, albeit challenging, but helpful to have that degree of engagement, because once we do align on a set of common principles, a set of common approaches, they really are almost like change management ambassadors together with the people team, right? They really live and breathe and represent these principles and approaches we agree to their departments, to their teams, which I think is a tremendous benefit. I mean, I've worked in companies where that just was not the case at all, and leaders were very passive in this situation. They sort of accepted what got effectively they were told, by the leadership team or the people team or whoever was kind of in charge of developing that program, and then so sort of half-heartedly
Yeah.
rolled it out, and often actually, if they then disagreed with some of it, ended up kind of finding ways around it under the table, and I think that's not a place you want to be. So I'm very grateful that we have always had a very strong engagement in terms of leaders understanding and being involved with people topics at Vinted.
Yeah, I think the really reassuring thing in that for other people leaders is if you have some tension and some difficulty and challenge in agreeing how you're going to approach something, actually see that as a strength in the business, that you've got a high degree of engagement in what you are trying to do in the people team, and that will pay off dividends when it comes to execution. And I think so many teams find themselves, actually it's quite easy to create stuff, particularly if you just stay isolated within your people team, and then all the problems come in execution, and it's so much harder to sort it out at that point because you're so invested in it as a people team. You've made all the decisions already. Whereas actually, if you can bring people in that much earlier, engage them and make decisions with them, you find the rollout that much easier.
And this actually has been perhaps one of the biggest learnings for me at Vinted so far. So I had come from more top-down organizations where the exact situation plays out that you just described, which is, you create a program, then you roll it out, and all the problems happen with execution and with adoption. And I think you have an illusion of speed when you do that, because you've got to what feels like an outcome quicker, but then actually, if adoption is poor, did you actually get it done?
Was it really an outcome in the first place? Yeah.
Whereas for us, we spend way more time debating, discussing, aligning, getting buy-in from leaders across the board, which initially felt very frustrating for me personally. It felt like stifling in terms of getting stuff done. But over time, I've come to understand that actually so much of the time invested at that stage comes back, plus interest later on when you roll things out, and it's just much smoother, and people are there with you, fighting in the trenches, getting it done, kind of thing. So that's been one of the biggest learnings, and frankly, I did not think that I would get to this point of really believing that, but I have come to this point.
That's really nice to hear. In that context, then, so this kind of, it takes a long time to get buy-in and to make decisions and create alignment. A long time is all relative, right?
Yeah.
Have there been other things that have surprised you in joining Vinted? I'll start with that.
Yeah. So this is definitely one of the key things that has surprised me. Just sort of shifting decision-making culture away from top-down toward consensus, and what that does to rolling programs out and adoption. It's been a big journey of understanding for me. Another one, I think when I came to Vinted, I sort of was a little skeptical, and I know this is a controversial thing to say, but I was a little skeptical of the notion of values. What I found in the past with company values is companies define them, I think, with good intent, but values are often an odd mix of, this is who we are, this is who we want to be, so actual core values versus aspirational values, and they're often designed to look good, right? So they're not meant to showcase every aspect of a company's culture, warts and all. And therefore, they're very. I sort of used to consider them a very unreliable proxy for a company's culture, for those reasons. And then I came to Vinted, and I realized that actually, perhaps the real issue with those values, in addition to all the ones I described, was that they were not very strongly lived. Meaning, it's kind of this age-old idea of having values on the wall and then not caring about them later on. I actually think that's a bigger problem in a lot of companies. And because the values aren't strongly lived and aren't considered at every turn, at every decision, you end up in a pretty weak culture that employees find difficult to define and pinpoint. But I actually found that Vinted is the opposite of that. So values are not just on the wall; they're actually truly strongly lived, that people really care about, and they get discussed in every meeting when we make any sort of decision. And I actually think they are a pretty good proxy for our culture. So it's been another major learning for me that actually, um, yeah, values, when genuine and strongly lived, can actually tell you a lot more about culture than I previously thought.
And do you think that revisiting the values, or raising them at every meeting, using them as a decision-making framework, is that the key thing that ensures they are lived?
Well, I think so. In addition to in addition to being not just that, I suppose it's that, but it's also clarity, right? So, and in a way, clarity and uniqueness. So, what do I mean by that? So, clarity, I think some companies have values which are frankly just so broad. You can ask any two people, they'll have a different interpretation of it. It's not very helpful to kind of try and drive any kind of behavior. Uniqueness also, some companies have values which are frankly just good business practice. Like, no business would benefit from not doing that thing, not behaving in that way, and which also kind of, I think, dilutes the value of values effectively. And so, my advice, I suppose, if you are defining your values, would be stick to what's truly core to you. So if you're going to be aspirational about any of your values, make it clear that one is aspirational, as opposed to something you're already doing, and something that's already core to you. Make sure they're unique to you. Make sure they're clearly defined. And then make it a habit to truly refer to them and talk about them, and use them as a filter for every single action and decision you make in the company. I think if you do that, then they become a really powerful organizational tool. If you don't do those things, I think it's a little bit of a waste of time.
Yeah. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. Okay, biggest challenge then. It's been not getting consensus and getting alignment. What's been the knottiest problem that you've had to work through since joining?
Well, it actually has been that.
Okay.
It has been basically bringing all of these leaders together who have been operating in a particular way within their world, with good feedback from their teams very often, and showing them that actually, there are parts of how you do things that could be better. Here's why. So, it's obviously, especially they themselves develop these ways of working. That's not always easy to hear. One, two, it's work for them to kind of have to rethink some of their previous ways. And so, essentially bringing leaders together, telling them the story of why it's important that we realign on how to do this particular thing, getting their buy-in on the new way forward, and actually getting their time and effort in rolling it out has been, a hugely difficult but rewarding feat that I'm very proud of my team of having pushed forward. So I would say that has been actually the toughest.
That was the toughest. Were there particular topics that were sort of the most debated, or push the most buttons?
Well, the ones you'd sort of expect. So performance management, compensation.
Yeah.
these are, I think the ones that I suppose the most emotive topics, right? The most closely connected to how people experience work, and yeah. So
Well, certainly, yeah, they're ones people care about in the moment, even if they don't necessarily have the longest lasting impact on how they experience work. But
yeah,
they're,
yeah.
they're emotive. Okay, so if when you get this right, when you get people and culture right in a growing business, why does that matter? What have you seen as the opportunity that that's created for Vinted, or the win that that's created for Vinted in its market, or in the broader market?
Yeah. So look, a few things. So I think it really adds to your employer brand. So you're able to hire um, more efficiently, and you're able to build stronger teams because people have a like if you get people in culture right, work travels, people understand that you're a good company to work for, and they go for it. You don't lose people. Obviously, attrition is really expensive, so replacing folks is tremendously time consuming, and expensive to retrain, etc. So you save a lot of money and time doing that, which then is also would also be an opportunity cost for all the other things you could be doing, right? So that's another piece. It's if you get your people programs right, and people understand, what the company's goals are, understand how they contribute to those goals, understand um, what are the expectations toward them in terms of performance, understand what how an impact, and how their compensation may or may not be impacted by that. I think you end up with just less friction. People sort of understand those things, and don't have to worry too much about them. There's clarity, which allows them to focus on actually furthering furthering programs and initiatives toward your mission. So to me, those are some of the key consequences of getting people and culture right.
Yeah, I think that's the second one in particular is really interesting, just in terms of uh, this is stuff that people care. How people experience work, they will care about. You can't, uh, yeah, you can't make that not the case. But if you can make things easy, like create an environment where your employees trust that you've made good decisions, where there is transparency and clarity about how these things work, you just take that worry out of people's minds. So their focus can then be on what their actual day
Yeah.
job, what the job is, how they add value to the company. I think that's it's hard to underestimate that, or hard not to underestimate that. I don't know which way around to
Yeah.
say it, but
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And this
Okay.
is where I guess transparency comes in, which is a key aspect of our culture. It's actually, funnily enough, not one of our values. This is one of my personal
Too
gripes. I
broad,
think
too broad.
it
It
should
couldn't
be.
fit there.
So I think so. We truly do default to transparency on everything, and yeah, and I do think that if you have, it kind of pushes you to make higher quality decisions, to create fairer programs, and so if you do that, if you create fair, thoughtful people programs and are then transparent about them, yeah, I do think you remove a lot of friction from people's lives, and they're happier and better able to focus on what on delivering value.
Yeah, and what I hear in that as well is it forces you to hold yourself to account, because
Absolutely, absolutely,
nothing is under the carpet. It's out there for people to see. So
exactly, exactly.
um,
It just forces you to be more thoughtful about decision making.
yeah, interesting. Okay, so then biggest successes. What have been your 3 proudest achievements in the time that you've been at Vinted?
Yeah. So look, I think building um, building a strong people team, folks who are incredibly bright and committed and just great, thoughtful, kind people, and they have weathered really tough challenges to get us to where we are today. So building that team and I guess helping bridge building a bridge between, if you will, the old guard and the new guard. So folks who have been at the company for a long time, and new folks kind of coming in with their expertise, wanting to change things, and kind of helping both sides see how they can only it can only be together that they can actually achieve anything, by having respect for the past and how things have been, but at the same time being open to new solutions. Um, so sort of building a strong people team is something I'm really proud of. And that's kind of one of my jobs. And I think another one of my job is to partner with our CEO Thomas and our leadership team in ensuring that we have a strong leadership, strong cohesive leadership team, and the right kind of organizational structure at the top. And so really proud of having worked closely with the team, driving cohesion. We've done a restructure of the business about, I think, 6 months ago or so, where we split from being functionally aligned to becoming these two business units I talked about earlier, supported by group functions. And that's, I think, driven a lot of efficiency of decision making and of progress for the company. So really proud of and not only that we made that decision and the team were able to go through this transition without politics, but actually the way we ended up sort of managing this change through the organization, we didn't really lose many people at all. We lost one key person through this transition. But otherwise, it was a change that was generally, despite it being challenging and painful for some, generally welcome by the organization. So proud of making that, driving that forward. And in connection with that, we hired a few new folks into our leadership team, which I personally took a lot of sort of made it my mission to partner with our CEO Thomas to getting those hires right. And I'm very proud of sort of the result and the folks that we managed to bring on board and the value that they've already created for the company. So those would be some highlights.
That's great. And you've shared so much advice with it through the course of this conversation already, but just reflecting on those highlights, maybe what's your advice for how somebody in a similar position to you, maybe in a slightly smaller business, how do you divide up your time and where you focus your attention? Because you talked about supporting and partnering the leadership team, but also growing your people team,
Yeah.
diving into certain sort of operational responsibilities like headhunting or recruiting.
Yeah.
How do you divide up your time? How do you decide what's the best use of your skill sets and time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I think it's worth thinking through. Like, I think as a head of people, you have a few different jobs, right? So as a head of people, you're effectively the leader of depending on the size of the organization, you're the leader of the people team, which again, if it's a larger people team, you actually have two jobs because you're the direct manager for the leadership team of the people team, and you're also the leader for the whole people team. So those are two jobs. You also are head of people to the whole organization, and there are some expectations that come with that in terms of communication, for example. You're then also a business partner to the CEO, and you definitely want to have that as one of your jobs. It's one of the key levers you have to drive the kind of culture and people experience you want to drive. And then really think through, like, okay, well, these are the buckets, these are the different jobs I have. Like, what are the what's the stuff that only I can do that I can really uniquely contribute? And I think that can then depend on the person a little bit, right? So I lean into doing some senior level recruitment, for example, because I love doing that. I think I did a decent job doing it, and and I know I think it's a good way to spend my time. I think it's something I can uniquely do well in my own context. But if you're someone that's, for example, amazing at being super organized, which for example I'm not, and you think that one of your unique contributions to the leadership team is going to be having a watertight OKR planning process, that could be something you pick up for yourself and not delegate. But I would really sort of do that. So in summary, think about the different buckets of your role. Who are your stakeholders, and what are your responsibilities toward each set of stakeholders, and like what are the bits of those responsibilities that you can uniquely contribute, and everything else, ideally find a way to delegate if possible. If not, that's more difficult, and then they have to be even even more organized. But that would be sort of what I would think about. And I
Yeah.
guess one more thing is just like one more piece of advice is and this is again like I would say nothing really novel, but ruthlessly prioritize, right? So there is going to be chaos everywhere, no matter what stage you're at. I mean, I thought that we'd have a lot less chaos at 1500 where we are today versus 400. We still have a lot of chaos, just new kinds of chaos, and that's fine. That's exactly how things are meant to be. Decide which bits of the which types of chaos are fine and actually good and okay to live in, and what parts of the organization things can happen case by case, and you don't need to have a policy, you don't need to have a system, you can just live in a world where it's all a bit chaotic, and which are have come to now an inflection point where you do need to have a process, a system, or of some sort to make sure that there's consistency, fairness, etc. So because you won't be able to solve every instance of chaos ever. So really figure out which fires are worth letting burn and which are the ones that you've got to double down on and fix. So that would be my other thing.
I totally agree. I love the fire analogy. I've used that one myself. And I think that just reflecting on your point about how you love doing the recruitment, so that's what you really leaned into. I think personally for the fulfillment of somebody in the role of a head of people, you also want to make sure to a degree that the fires that you tend to are absolutely what the business needs you to tend to, but you need a degree of overlap with what you're good at and will give you energy too. What
100%.
you can't do is go wholly into what you want to do space and address the wrong fires.
Of course.
But if you go so wholly into what the business needs and nothing overlaps with what you get energy from and are good at, you're also going to burn yourself out. So it's like you want to tread that line between where can you find the greatest degree of overlap, and that's where I think you will end up delivering the greatest value for the business.
Exactly. 100%.
Okay, so last question then. What's next? What's your hopes, or where would you like to be in sort of 3 years' time, and where do you see Vinted being in the sort of similar timescale as well?
Yeah, look, so I'm super happy. It's by far and away the best job I've ever had, and I have I'm hoping to stay as long as they'll have me. And we have really exciting challenges ahead in terms of scaling our business units. So we have a relatively large core business, but it's still a small fraction of the fashion industry as a whole. And there's a huge mega trend toward people moving away from fast fashion toward secondhand fashion. And I think being able to be in the driver's seat for that revolution is really exciting. And I'm just feel very humbled to be able to be here for it. On the other hand, on the shipping side, there's really a huge need for more sustainable shipping options, and I think we really have a bit of a unique opportunity to drive that transition. So, from a business perspective, the company just has so much going for it in terms of the stuff we can achieve if we execute well, that I think it's really a privilege to be able to drive the people agenda to be able to support that. So no plans to kind of move on. Very happy here.
Amazing. Thank you, Daniel, and thanks for sharing your experience of the last couple of years and your wisdom with others. I've really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to many more in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, B. Really enjoyed it as well.
In next month's episode, I'll be talking to Sophie Amato, Head of People and Culture at the Social Value Portal. Sophie's perfected the art of treading the tightrope between day-to-day firefighting and building for the future. Join me next month to hear how she does it and how this has helped to build a resilient culture at SVP. If you'd like to chat about any of the ideas that Daniel and I discussed in this episode, or want to talk about the people and culture challenges and opportunities in your company, then please connect with me on LinkedIn or send an email to b.heller@thepioneers.co.uk. Thank you.